Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. Follow us right now on Instagram at JoshDJ57. That's JoshDJ5 and 7. JoshDJ57. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Tell your friends. And today, now we've got a lot of guests we've had that have been on the microphone as far as DJing is concerned, having an on-air shift. However, there's been people that we want to talk to, and we get to talk to somebody today who worked mainly behind the scenes in production. And they oftentimes have great stories too. In fact, they've got just as great stories. We've got one of them today. His name is Douglas C. Brown. His website is douglascbrown.com. He currently does voiceover as well as production. He's been production director for many stations in Southern California. And the cool thing about the interview is we start off him asking me a question, and here it is.
Tell me more about what you're doing. What are you doing with this whole thing?
Well, about a year and a half ago, I was working with Jay Gardner, who had been on KRF 101 twice, KHJ Car Radio back in the early 80s, and also worked for Letterman. And he was telling me all these great stories, and I thought, I got to put this to tape. These are stories too good not to share with the public. And I noticed, that the TV and Movie Academy have all these great interviews with actors, producers, writers, but there was really nothing for radio, at least nothing that I saw on YouTube. And I thought, let me change that, at least try to contribute a little to that. Mm-hmm. And so here we are with that. And so I've got an interview about 20 people so far. And so I got an interview like Brian Byrne from KRF, Ted Zingenbush from Coast, and many others, and Larry Kenney out in New York, who was the voice of Lionel and Thundercats. So I kind of go around looking online for different personalities and contact them, and I'm kind of hitting, I guess, like a baseball player, 300 when it comes to that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, good for you.
Well, thank you. I know that Skywalker has his own podcast as well, where he's got an interview personality. So there are a couple of those out there. And then there's somebody else whose name slips me right now that does something, I think, on Spotify or on their own website. I'm hoping to kind of like contribute to that and also share some wonderful stories that people, some may have heard and many have not heard, but are like, wow, those are cool stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Okay. So is your because I'm not as high profile a radio guy, but I was around LA radio for a long time, but I'm not primarily known as an air talent, but you don't really care about that? I mean, you're
No. In fact, I love hearing stories from people working behind the scenes because sometimes they have better stories even than maybe the jocks themselves. A friend of mine wrote a book about the Carol Burnett show about 7 years ago, and he was unable to get interviews with Carol or Vicki Lawrence or Tim Conway, Lyle Wagner, but he did get interviews with Harvey Korman's son, Chris, who provided a lot of great stories as well as some rare photographs. And then he also was able to get interviews from about 50 different people who both worked for CBS, worked for the Carol Burnett show behind the scenes, as well as a lot of guest stars that had been on the show. And so he compiled this comprehensive guide to every single episode and a description of each episode, including the lost years from 1967 to 72 that have never been shown in repeats because they're owned by a different production company before Carol herself and her then husband Joe Hamilton took control of the show. Yeah.
Okay. Huh. It seems like there's always money to be made with reruns. You'd be surprised that those are quote lost end quote and not being streamed on one of the secondary or tertiary channels that runs all those ancient TV series. Everything from Gunsmoke to old westerns and old sitcoms, F Troop, and all that weird shit.
Oh yeah. Well, I asked Wesley at his book signing event in Hollywood a couple years ago. I said, what are the chances? Because they finally got control and were able to release those lost years onto DVD. I said, what are the chances of us seeing repeats of those years on TV? He said, the problem is that there were so many musical scores during that production that the licensing for music is so expensive that the, little stations like MeTV and Antenna don't want to have to pay the exorbitant fees for licensing the music.
Yeah, that's true of a lot of shows. I mean, like the WKRP in Cincinnati, of course, is the famous one that used to use contemporary music, to give it a realistic feel at the time. But it was prohibitively expensive. So I guess with them, they wanted to, as I understood it, they wanted to syndicate those in reruns well enough that they went in and actually replaced some of the music with, generic stuff that they didn't have to pay as much for, because they really thought there was a market for that show, and they thought it was worth investing in replacing the hits that would have been too expensive.
That's
and
true.
I thought that it seems to me there's not that many who are willing to do that. I mean, I think about I'm kind of a country music fan, so I've always appreciated the Dillards, and they did a lot of guest shots on the old Andy Griffith show. They were billed as the Darling Brothers or the Darlings or something.
Wow.
They were playing the role of a bluegrass band in the Andy Griffith show. And as I understand, a lot of those don't play either because, again, those it's copyrighted music in there, and people lament that, some of the Andy Griffith fans. So, but I don't know. Maybe they figured out a way around the cost of that, or gotten waivers or something.
Yeah, what happened with WKRP when they first released certain episodes on DVDs, people were complaining because it said like the first season, quote unquote. But then again, it had the canned music instead of the actual original tunes they played. So a couple of years ago, Hugh Wilson, the creator, and some others did a painstaking process of securing the rights to every single song that was ever played on the show. And they were able to get all except 2 songs. And then they released what they called the Ultimate WKRP box set, which had every single episode in its full complete form as originally shown when it was first broadcast over 40 years ago. I forget what the 2 songs were that they couldn't get the rights to, but otherwise everything else was there. And then as far as the Andy Griffith show is concerned, I'm not sure if those episodes are on DVD. My guess is if they are on DVD, they probably cost a little bit more in order to pay for the music licensing. Like, for instance, I've got Knight Rider on DVD, and it does have, like, covers of hit songs. It's not the actual original artist. But I noticed the Knight Rider DVDs were more expensive, but that's because they used the music that was actually played during the show rather than cut it out or replace it with something else.
Sure.
I didn't find that out till years later.
Well, I have no problem with doing that. I mean, the musicians deserve to get paid. I guess if somebody thought that it was worthwhile, as you pointed out, the producer to go in and make the box set of WKRP, make it worthwhile, I applaud him for doing that. But that was more. He thought he could, sell a lot of those box sets, or he wouldn't have done it.
Oh yeah.
Just to do it for syndication probably wouldn't have been worth doing. But anyway, it's just interesting that there's so much of this vintage stuff that people are interested in. They get a lot of mileage out of on the cable channels, and
they do.
And there is interest in these things. I think I guess it's what that is. It's a commentary on the sorry state of current commercial television and pop music, that when you hear something that sounds like it's authentic or real or actually funny or actually well written and well acted on these shows, they're attractive. People as opposed to the crap that's on most of commercial television today.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because my dad's wife's great grandson is 9 years old. And he loves 1980s movies. He just idolizes them. He loves watching them all the time, from Ferris Bueller to Midnight Madness. I forget what the other ones that were his favorites, but I'm like, wow, a 9-year-old. This was about 30 years before he was born, just about. But he loves those. And then his mother was born in the late 80s, and she loves 50s music, 50s and 60s oldies. And even has a tattoo of Elvis on her shoulder, even though she was born about 11 years after Elvis died.
Oh, my God, a tattoo. Oh, my God. That's, whoa.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was, I had stumbled across that, I guess it was on Turner Classic Movies the other day. I recorded that production called This Is Elvis. It was done in 81, I think. They did a really interesting job there of bringing in an actor to portray a younger Elvis in the early years. And then, of course, they had a lot of actualities from, say, the mid-50s on. And it was a David L. Walper production, so it was actually pretty well done. But, again, that's one of those things that totally... I missed it in 1981 when it was around, but it was interesting. And, of course, the more recent thing with Austin Butler doing Elvis was absolutely phenomenal. I cannot believe how Austin Butler just disappeared into that character. I mean, what an acting job. The only thing weird about that movie, of course, is they got all kinds of stuff historically wrong. But and it seems to me that movie should have been called Elvis and Tom, because it was really more about Tom Parker and what he did to manipulate Elvis and the like. And of course, the problem was that Tom Hanks, totally overacted the character. It was almost cartoonish. It was cartoonish to my mind. And knowing how good Tom Hanks is, I wonder why he made that choice. But anyway, that movie was pretty dang good, except, again, they messed up the timelines and fudged on some facts. And then they took all these 50s recordings and pumped them up so that in a Dolby theater they sounded like Led Zeppelin, which I thought was, that's not what those early records sounded like, but they were trying to tune it for today's ears, because if you just played the way a Sun record sounds to young people today, they'd go, "What's wrong with that?" So history sometimes takes a back seat to telling a good story.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That's my big pet peeve in movies, when they change actual facts. I mean, sometimes you do have to take a little bit of artistic license just for continuity's sake, but when it's something that blatantly contradicts what actually happened, that's where I don't dig it. Like, for instance, the Jackie Robinson movie 42, starring Chadwick Boseman, I think there were only two inaccurate things in the whole movie. One of them was the fact Leo DeRocher was not suspended for the 1947 season by Major League Baseball because he was a swinger. Everybody knew he was. It had to do with some sort of gambling accusation that he wasn't himself involved in, but they thought he was, so that's why they took him out. But I guess they thought that wouldn't be, very sexy, so they decided to put that in instead. And then there was one other situation, which I can't remember right now, but otherwise the film was pretty accurate to what actually took place. And then, like the Buddy Holly story, that was the first biopic I remember watching. I loved it. I was about 6 years old. Went with a friend of mine, and we loved the music. And I actually thought I was watching Buddy Holly because I'd seen pictures of his record before that, and then going to see the movie, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy looks just like Buddy Holly. Of course, Gary Busey, and he even sang the songs himself.
Yeah, he did a pretty dang good job on that. I mean, I'm a huge Holly fan, and I was ready to be totally disappointed in that movie, and it actually came off better than I thought it would. And Lou Diamond Phillips actually was pretty good in it too, as Richie Valens.
That's right, yeah. And then they had Marshall Crenshaw playing Buddy Holly in the movie La Bamba, and he looked like Buddy Holly in that picture too.
Yeah, Marshall Crenshaw is quite a talented guy. I was really surprised that he never became a big hit. He and his brother, they were a tight band. And I must have 5 or 6 of his albums, but he never really broke through. It was really too bad. He was,
Yeah.
it's so weird. The record business, the music business, is it has so much to do with not only talent but luck and timing and promotion. Blah 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 blah. There's so many people are just maybe appeared a little too early in the grand timeline of history, or a little late, and they didn't get any recognition. And I think that's really interesting when that happens.
And you think about the lost opportunities. Like Elvis could have had opportunities to travel to Europe, except the problem was that Tom Parker was in the country illegally, and that would have meant he'd have to stay in Europe if he went with Elvis there. Because a friend of mine told me a story about how back in the early 70s, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, along with Mick Jagger and Keith Richard, the four of them together wanted to produce an album for Elvis Presley and have them play on the album as well, doing the instruments. And Elvis seemed all gung-ho about it, but then Parker said no. Then about a year or two later, David Bowie wrote a song for Elvis Presley. And again, Tom Parker turned it down. So David Bowie, doing his best Elvis impression, recorded the song himself, and that song was Golden Years.
Yeah.
Have that golden years.
The real kicker there is that Parker wouldn't let Elvis record anything that they didn't get half the publishing on. There's been many a story of people who would approach Elvis with a song. Elvis would hear it and say he wants to record it. But Parker, even if Elvis himself wanted to do it, Parker said no, unless you put Elvis's name on it as co-writer, and we get half the royalties.
Wow.
So Elvis missed many opportunities to do that. I've heard that from a couple different songwriters who were hoping to get their stuff recorded, and they knew Elvis liked it, and it was right for him. But Parker was just running that whole show with an iron fist. And, yeah, he was illegal. He couldn't get a passport. There's no way he could get out of the U.S. So his name wasn't Tom. It wasn't Parker. He wasn't a colonel, and he wasn't a citizen. Other than that, he was a great guy. And his management contract with Elvis, I think, was something like he kept 30% of the gross. I mean, Elvis was a naive kid to sign the damn thing. He didn't have legal advice, and hey, back in those days, in say 1956, there was no such thing as entertainment attorneys standing around telling you what's fair and what's not. Plus, everybody thought rock and roll was going to disappear in about 2 years. Nobody took it seriously. Everybody thought it was a flash in the pan. I mean, and that the copyrights weren't going to be worth anything. And even the artists wouldn't be worth anything. I mean, who knew?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everybody thought it was, they're going to go the way of Bill Haley, right? 2 hits and then, right?
See you later, alligator.
Yep, that's right. Well, that's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the music and radio business are always been very entwined, obviously.
It's the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and we're talking with Douglas Brown. His website, by the way, is douglascbrown.com, douglascbrown.com. Check it out. He's got some voiceover demos there. And next time, Doug talks about one of his favorite idols growing up, one of the reasons he got into radio. The gentleman was born Dale Payne. However, we best know him by a very animal-like name. We'll find out who that is next time here on the Talking Archive.